Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the Critic Who's a Cynic, and today we're going to be talking about Solo, a box office bomb story, because this is just ridiculous now. The fact that they're still trying to talk about and spin this movie to the positive is just ridiculous. There are still people out there who are claiming with no real information whatsoever that Solo is going to at least break even or even make a profit, which just does not work. And we're going to break down those numbers again today. I've done several videos on this before, so if you're interested in box office numbers, please go check those videos out. And I cannot believe that people are still spinning this in such a way that is just ridiculous. So anyway, this is from comicbook.com, and they're saying Solo passes surprising Star Wars movie at the box office. So already, based on the headline alone, you think to yourself, what are you what is this talking about? What is this trying to say? It comes across as I can tell you right now, this is totally a clickbait title. There is no other way to really describe it, because everyone's like, wait a minute, Solo actually passed a Star Wars film? Well, when you actually look at the numbers, it does not work, and it's just total hogwash. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, let's actually dive into it. This is an article by Nicole Drum, and also it's funny that this person pretty much contradicts themselves pretty early on and even says, oh, well, in reality, this isn't actually the case, but it's interesting. It's like, no, this is not interesting at all. This is totally ridiculous. This is total garbage. This is total hot trash right here. Anyway, so starts off by saying Solo Star Wars story may have been a box office disappointment. That is putting it lightly. It is a box office bomb. It's going to lose $200 million at least, minimum, at the box office. And we'll talk about that a little bit today as to why I got to that number. And there's just no other way to really get about it. But it's no longer the lowest performing installment in the Star Wars franchise, sort of. And that's the thing. You see, you should have had that sort of in the title before you went ahead and said, oh, it's no longer the lowest, before it's like, oh, it surpasses the lowest it surpasses the lowest grossing Star Wars movie at the box office. It's just like, no, I'm sorry, you're not basing, once again, we see these people are not basing themselves in reality or common sense or facts and figures. And so let's go ahead and see what this person's actually going to try and say, because I think it's important. Solo Star Wars story is currently sitting at a domestic gross total of $210 million, which is abysmal, a number that puts it just slightly ahead of the $209.4 million domestic gross of 1980's The Empire Strikes Back. Now, here's the biggest problem with it. First off, that's just the domestic total. That's not taking in the worldwide total. So I'm already going to show you why that number is very different than what they're trying to present it as. But it's just, to me, ridiculous that they're trying to say, oh, look, the domestic total is technically higher, and so therefore it means that Solo is not much of a bomb, right? It doesn't mean that it's that terrible of a story, right? No, it's one of the worst grossing Star Wars. It is the worst grossing Star Wars film of all time, and it's not going to surpass any of those other films. And there's one big reason for that, which is what this is going to get into, but it doesn't actually give you the numbers to show you how big of a difference it actually is. You want to know why? Because, again, they're trying to protect Lucasfilm. They're trying to protect Disney. They don't want to go down that rabbit hole, and it's sad because, again, we, especially for a lot of us here on this channel, a lot of people on Geeks and Gamers and all of the other channels out there, we just like common sense. Like, we try and speak from a commonsensical perspective. We try and speak from a sense of, facts and figures. At least I try to, especially when I do my box office numbers. And I really do think it's important, because a lot of people want that. A lot of people really crave just the truth. And so when you try and spin things in this way, and they're very obvious in how you're spinning them, I'm sorry, this is going to turn a lot of people off from your website completely. And I think that's a very, very bad road to take. We see that Disney's already doing that by just doubling down on the fact that Kathleen Kennedy has not been officially fired. They have not made an official statement. They have not condemned the words of people like Chuck Wendig or anyone else who's blatantly attacked the fans in several different ways. And they've just gone along with all of these really crap narratives. And guess what that's doing? That's just keeping people angry, and that's going to affect Episode 9 and all future Star Wars films going forward. They have to make an action now, or else this is just these box office numbers for Solo is just going to be the start of it. So it goes on to say, if you look at the box office numbers without adjustments for inflation, you see that the Star Wars story domestic total outgrosses The Empire Strikes Back. That is just, oh my goodness. So they're saying, oh look, $210 million, that's higher than $209.4 million, but that's just the domestic total, and that's before you adjust it for inflation. Well, let's actually break this down, because they're not actually going to tell you what the adjustment for inflation is. So I go ahead and found a calculator for you guys, and as you can see here, converted from 1980 to this year, that number domestically, this is just the domestic total for Empire Strikes Back, is worth $639 million. Yeah, $639 million. That is nothing near the $210 million that currently was made by Solo in 2018. So to say, oh, it went past it domestically, it's like, okay, but you can't just say, oh, we can't bother looking at inflation. No, that's very important because that shows you that Empire Strikes Back made over $400 million more than Solo did when you actually break down the numbers. And again, that's not even looking at the foreign totals, which were significantly higher for Empire Strikes Back than for this garbage tier movie. The fact that the foreign market made less, that Solo made less at the foreign market than it did domestically, that is awful. That is awful for any movie, especially a big budget film. But for Star Wars, that is just tragic, and it's so bad. So, under those parameters, which are very, very broad parameters, Solo is now 9th out of the 10 movies, though if you account the inflation in the last 2 reissues, one in 1982 and one in 1997, of Empire, the Han Solo origin movie slides back in last place. And I love what they're trying to do here. They say it makes it seem like you need the reissues with inflation in order to get to that amount. No, you don't. Literally just looking at the domestic total adjusted for inflation makes all of the difference. $400+ million worth of a difference. And so, yeah, you can't just, oh my goodness, the spin here is ridiculous. And again, this was the title of the article. Solo passed a surprising Star Wars movie at the box office. Well, no, it didn't. It has not even come close. It will not come close. And in fact, the overall domestic and foreign totals together will not even come close to just the domestic total of Empire Strikes Back. That is ridiculous. That is awful. All right, so while the straight unadjusted numbers will be either welcome news or simply splitting hairs depending on what side of your ever-growing Star Wars fan you're on, no, it's not. It literally, you are just splitting hairs here. That is not good news. That is not welcome news. It doesn't matter what side of the argument or the debate that you're on. That's just, again, those are just numbers that are not based in reality. That's not telling the truth. That's a half-truth. That's the very definition of half-truth, saying, oh, look, here are the numbers. Oh, but wait a minute, we forgot to tell you that, oh, when it's just adjusted for inflation, it's a $400 million difference. Yeah, that's splitting hairs right there. There is no difference. Again, this is comic book, just spinning the narrative, trying to say, oh, hey, yeah, if you're on this side of the argument, then you might say we're splitting hairs here. It's like, no, you are. That's just a fact. You are splitting hairs. This is not good news. This is not good news for Solo, and we're going to dive into the numbers for Solo about why this is nowhere close to being good news at all. All right, so he continues on to say, depending on what side of the ever-growing Star Wars divide you're on, Forbes points out, Forbes, was it Scott Mendelson? Our boy Scotty, is he the one that was talking about this? Because that's not really a good, reliable source for you. Points out that Solo's box office numbers reflect a handful of variables worth examining outside of the Star Wars context. That's a bit of a stretch. Solo's overall domestic totals are similar to the other fan-driven Memorial Day weekend releases. Specifically, Forbes noted that the 2013's Fast and Furious 6 had a total domestic total take of $238 million, with $117 million on that opening weekend, as compared to Solo's $103 million opening weekend. Once again, those are not adjusted for inflation. So once again, they are being disingenuous, saying, oh, but look how close it is to Fast and Furious 6. No. When you adjust those numbers for inflation, it becomes even broader. The divide becomes even bigger. So no, I'm not trusting Forbes now, because apparently Forbes is just ignoring inflation, and that's a very big thing to look at, because you can't just look at $100 today and compare that to $100 in 1930, because that's a very different amount of money. $100 in 1930 was worth a heck of a lot more than it is today. I mean, I'm sorry, this is just ridiculous. This is just total nonsense. All right, what really hurt Solo is its overseas performance. So what really hurt Solo was Kathleen Kennedy, John Kasdan, and all those knuckleheads at Disney and Lucasfilm, who just kept on running that narrative into the ground and driving that franchise and that movie into the ground. And they're going to continue to do that with Star Wars unless we see a major change. Like, Star Wars is going to continue to make less money and probably lose money at even Episode 9, or break even. I think at this point it's going to break even at worst. I do think that if they keep going with this narrative and they keep going down this rabbit hole, that it could end up them to lose money. I know a lot of people think they are going to lose money with Episode 9, but I can tell you right now, the same people who did not see Solo have no plans to see Episode 9, and I think that is something that they just cannot ignore anymore. I think it's way too important for them to do so. So it says the film fell completely flat overseas, and while Star Wars films are a little less successful globally as compared to domestic popularity, Solo's lack of overseas success is notable, but it also wasn't exactly set up for success. Removing all other arguments for why the film underperformed, such as the May opening, which is crap, and the supposed fan backlash of there is no supposed fan backlash. Look at Geeks and Gamers. They're up to 60,000 subscribers. Look at all these other channels, and you have like a solid amount of people. Just look at the ratings for The Last Jedi. Look at the fact that they don't count half-star ratings. Look at the fact that they don't do so many other things, and you'll see there is indeed a fan backlash. Again, whether or not there's a lot of people that actively boycotted the film, though if you are on social media, you know there were a lot of people that actively boycotted Solo and will continue to boycott Episode 9. You know that there are a lot of people who are pissed. So there is a fan backlash. There's absolutely no denial of that. Again, these are people living in their tiny little bubble, ignoring inflation, and now ignoring reality of the fact that there's a fan backlash. It's ridiculous. And so it goes on. Solo opened between two highly anticipated and massively successful films, Avengers: Infinity War and The Incredibles. Given the profile of those films, Solo was very well, may have gotten lost in the shuffle. No, again, that's total trash. That is total garbage. Those types of situations, one, the May release, that's total garbage because we've had Star Wars films that have been released before and have made a lot of money. So this is absolute total trash right here. This is just totally just trying to explain. I love how they bring up Incredibles 2. Now, Incredibles 2 came out a long time after Solo did, and it just, to me, doesn't make any sense because it's just not based on reality. I'm sorry, but if it was a good Star Wars film, if this was Empire Strikes Back, if this was A New Hope, and the fans were happy and the fans were loving it, and if the fans were excited, nothing would stop them from going to see those films. I mean, even look at the prequels. The prequels, in hindsight, did not age well for a lot of people. But guess what? People lined up to go see the first one. People still lined up to see the second one and the third, even with all of that anger, even with all that frustration with some of the characters and some of the things going on screen. So you cannot compare the two. It is just, again, unrealistic. It is ridiculous. And guess what? Those films compete with other films. And just to think, oh, yeah, it's competing with other films. I'm sorry, but you know that December is like one of the most competitive months of the year. I mean, obviously you have the summer months, but December is also very big because you have a lot of awards movies that come out, but then you also have some big budget films that come out in December as well. And look at this upcoming, this 2019 release date. You've got Jumanji that's going to be there. You've got, I mean, literally so many other films that are going to be there, and that's already the excuse that they're using, is saying, oh, it's because it's opening with a competitive field, and that's why it's not going to do as well. No. If it's a good Star Wars film, if the Star Wars fandom was happy right now, there's nothing that would keep them from going to see this opening night. There's nothing that would keep that movie from making a lot of bank at the box office. So I'm so sick and tired of all of these excuses because, again, they are not based in reality. There are no facts to actually back them up, and it's just all speculation. We are talking about raw numbers here. They are not. However, Solo's underperformance may ultimately end up being just a little bump in the road for both Disney and Star Wars long run. We've just passed the halfway point of the calendar year, and Disney has already passed the $2 billion mark at the box office, and with Ant-Man and the Wasp newly in theaters and some significant releases coming up in the back end. So this is trying to say that, oh, well, you know, Disney's not going to care because, yeah, they may have lost $200 million plus at, you know, on this movie project alone, but they're still making money on all those other films. Well, I'm sorry, no company, no corporation just says, oh, we'll take a loss. We'll take a $200 million loss on a film and keep doing that. No company in their right mind would do that. No head of a company, no stockholders would say, yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, that's a good thing. It affects our stocks. It affects the worth of our stock. And yeah, that's totally fine. No one thinks like that. So again, this is just this circle logic, this backwards thinking logic that, oh, because all these other films in the MCU are doing fantastic. Talk about fatigue. 20 films in 10 years versus what? Maybe 3 or 4 years and only 3 or 4 films? And yeah, you talk about, you know, oh, there's just Star Wars fatigue. No. If these were good films, there would be no fatigue. That's why Marvel has been able to pump out 20, all with positive reviews for the most part, and all making money in 10 years. So again, if someone competent behind Lucasfilm was actually running Lucasfilm right now, that would be the same case with Star Wars. Star Wars would be making bank, and there would be so many. We'd have 2 Star Wars films a year, maybe even 3 Star Wars films a year. And they would all make money. They would all do very well. But the problem is that you have Kathleen Kennedy, who's in charge, and she is not a forward-thinking executive. Again, she might be fine in doing other things, but when it comes to running Star Wars, she is not a very good executive. She should be taken down. She should be forced to step down because she has no idea what she's doing. They need someone like a Kevin Feige who's going to think ahead and is actually going to be able to plan things in advance. I'm sorry, but that's just the fact. That's just the situation that we're actually in. All right, it says, on the Star Wars side of things, while it's been reported that Lucasfilm is putting additional standalone films on hold, Solo director Ron Howard recently told TMZ that the report may not have been entirely accurate, and Lucasfilm itself confirmed there are still multiple unannounced projects going forward, and the main Star Wars universe is definitely going forward. Yesterday it was announced that Kerry Russell, best known for a career-making role in Felicity, has joined Star Wars Episode 9. We talked about that in the last video, talked about how she probably might be Mara Jade. However, a lot of fans already were saying, yeah, the character name might be Mara Jade, but she won't be Mara Jade because Disney's going to mess it up in some way. Again, that's what you're dealing with right now. You are saying, oh, there's no fan backlash. Look at social media. Look at Rotten Tomatoes scores. Look at your box office numbers. If you want an actual statistic to look at your box office numbers. And speaking of which, let's look at that right now. So this is boxofficemojo.com, a very, very good, well-renowned numbers site. And let's just look worldwide 2018. Guess what's not on that list? Solo, Star Wars story. Guess what it is? Deadpool 2, Incredibles 2, Jurassic World 2, Black Panther, Avengers: Infinity War. Notice no Star Wars film. Star Wars film came out this year, and it's not a worldwide #1 hit. That is amazing to me. That is awful. No Star Wars film has ever gone through that before, I feel. Top 2018 films. This is just domestic totals. Black Panther, Avengers, Incredibles, Jurassic World 2, Deadpool 2. And also, Jurassic World 2 has only been out for, what, 2-3 weeks, and it's already made significantly more, almost twice as much when you put all the numbers together than Solo has made. That is awful. That is abysmal. And guess what? Jurassic World is not a very great film either. So they obviously know what they're doing, because even with a bad film, they're able to get the audiences to come out to see the film. Again, something that, maybe Lucasfilm could learn. And then here we have the actual weekend breakdown. So when we actually break down the numbers, we see that Solo has been out for roughly about 7 weeks now, so almost 2 months, and it's just not looking good. Look at those weekend totals. Again, a drop of 65%, 46, 36, 54, 40, and then this past weekend, 63%. So it's always been on a downward spiral. The numbers have been dropping tremendously, and it's just not looking very good. And so then we go to, well, how do I know that this movie is going to lose $200 million at the box office? Well, production budget. See, that says not available. You want to know why? Because Disney will not actually release the numbers to us. So what we do know is that before they fired Lord and Miller, before all of that, the film was costing around $250 million. After, though, we know that they reshot most of the film. 80% of the movie had been shot up to that point, and Ron Howard reshot most of it. And so, therefore, we know that that probably ballooned the budget up to around $350 million. And again, I think that's a fair estimate. That might be on the low end for some people, but I think it's a fair estimate. Then you have to add in the marketing budget, which some people usually say is about twice, or rather, you twice the production budget, and that usually adds it up. That might be a little too much. So let's just say, for the sake of it, if it costs $350 million to make it, they spent maybe $150 million to promote it. That brings it up to $500 million. So that means that this film needed to make a hell of a lot more to be able to make that up. Why is that the case? Well, let's look at the numbers. Worldwide, Solo has, at this point, only made $379.8 million. So this film is very likely not going to reach $400 million, and if it does, it's going to barely reach $400 million. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that though it grossed $400 million, guess how much of that Lucasfilm and Disney will actually see? Only 60%, because if you actually break down the numbers, you see that films, production companies, they only receive 60% of the total box office take, and that's because of the arrangements that they make with theaters, and it's different between domestic and worldwide. But in all, the fair estimate that's given by so many experts in the industry is around 60% is the number that they see. Well, that 60% of $400 million, let's just take 50% of that. That brings it down to $200 million. So you see already that they would need to make, that would be essentially that they would have to make, and I did this earlier, they would have to make around over $715 million if they were going to break even originally. They're not even going to come close to that, so that means they're going to have a loss of at least $200 million at the box office, because $400 million versus $715 million is a huge difference, and that's not even taking into account what it actually cost to make to actually make the film overall. So, guys, what do you think of this? Comic book is just this is just a garbage article. I'm sorry, it's making so many excuses for this film about why it failed, about why it's not doing well, and then it tries to say, well, look, there is some light at the end of the tunnel because it made more than The Empire Strikes Back, before you adjust the numbers for inflation and realize that it made $400 million more back in 1980 than Solo today. But hey, I don't know. Honestly, I've gotten to the point now where I can't understand their logic and their thinking. They are so caught up in themselves, they are so caught up in their bubbles that they don't want to actually look outside of it to see reality, to see common sense, to see facts and figures. Again, that's how I always try and treat everything that I touch, everything that I talk about is based in reality. Now, I might have opinions that are, again, just my opinion, and I respect your opinion if you disagree with me, but when it comes to these things, especially with numbers, you can't really disagree with it because it's the actual numbers themselves. So anyway, what do y'all guys think of the numbers? What do you think? Answer this question down below in the comments. What do you think the overall loss for Solo is going to be? We know it's going to be roughly around $200 million, but what do you think the end loss is going to be for this film? Please let me know in the comments below. I'd greatly appreciate that. Also, hit that like button if you liked what you saw. I also would greatly appreciate that. So hit that subscribe if you haven't done so already. Share this video as well. It helps me out tremendously. Have a great day, and as always, God bless.